Hello.
Recording in progress.
Hello. Okay, so shall we start?
Yes, please.
Okay, so hello everyone. It's very nice to be here and to have this opportunity to share our stories with you. My name is Hayrye Rüzgar, and you can see my friend and colleague at the Humboldt Corporation, Andri Christofides. We are coming from a tiny island in the Mediterranean called Cyprus that is divided in even tinier pieces. I come from the northern piece and my mother tongue is Cypriot Turkish, and Andri is coming from the southern piece and her mother tongue is Cypriot Greek. So as you may know, the island of Cyprus is divided by a buffer zone that stretches along the island since the 1960s and has its current shape since 1974, as you can see on the screen at the moment. And the buffer zone is controlled by the United Nations, and since 2003, it can be crossed by people at designated crossing points. Now, I'm going to start sharing my story from 2003, when the first crossing point was opened in Cyprus, because I believe that had a great impact on who I am, my studies, my career. I come from a small town in northwest of Cyprus called Morphou, or Güzelyurt, or Omorfo, depending on the language, the dialect, because Cypriots speak differently than formal Greek or formal Turkish, depending on who you are talking to, because these labels, the names of the cities, might change according to one's ideologies. And in 2004, I had just started middle school, and I remember that my teachers were not coming to school to attend demonstrations for peace because we were going to have a referendum on the Annan peace plan. And growing up at a time like this, my ideas, my feelings were shaped accordingly and supported by the opening of crossing points and the possibility of contact with the Greek Cypriot community. That's why I decided to study political science and international relations in Istanbul. And then I moved on to study political communications in Amsterdam because I felt that this was much needed in Cyprus. And after 7 years of living abroad, I returned to Cyprus in 2015.
Hello from me too. So I'm Andri, and I think in starting to share my own story, my starting date would also be 2015. At the time, I was doing my bachelor's dissertation in English literature in the UK, and I decided to research about the fluidity of the Cypriot national identity and how it relates to post-colonial state of the country, and other countries that kind of experienced conflict upon their independence. So I was studying about Cyprus, I was studying about Cypriots, but I was excluding half of my country in what I thought at the time was well-rounded research. So when I moved to Belgium to study social anthropology, I began realizing that even though I was 23, I didn't really know anything meaningful about the other half of my island. So for this reason, I decided to study for my master's thesis, the transformation of borders in Nicosia in literal and symbolic ways. So at the age of 24, I crossed for the first time the buffer zone. I visited the north side of my island, of my home country, of my hometown. And I started kind of experiencing this transformation. So like Hayrye, after 6 years of living and studying abroad, I returned to Cyprus in 2018. But note that neither of us had any meaningful contact or long-lasting contact with someone from the other community all this time until the home for cooperation, until we met in the buffer zone. So today at the home, which we will share a bit more about in a bit, we're constantly trying to find creative ways for people to share new experiences, for people who grew up like us, to now form new connections and get out of their comfort zone, and to actually form a larger one and more meaningful and peaceful one together, and to initiate any sort of positive transformation. So I think now we'll share a very quick image about the buffer zone to also give you a bit of context, because it might be very useful to understand the place in between where we work from. So I'll just, yeah. So this is the buffer zone, or some snippets of it. As the Greek Cypriots call it, the community I come from, we also call it the dead zone, or no man's land. But it has been indeed dead for many, many decades. And I remember as a teenager going out at night in the old city, in the city center, there was always this underlying fear of accidentally crossing to the north. Because when you walk down the main street, you reach kind of a crossing point or a buffer zone. And then on the other side lies the other community. And at the time when we're teenagers going out, we were always concerned of not accidentally crossing and being arrested by the Turkish Cypriot authorities. I'm not sure why we thought it was so easy to accidentally cross a heavily militarized buffer zone. But for some reason, we really strongly felt it was possible. And even I remember when I was 18 and I got my driver's license and I started driving around the old city, I was so concerned to not accidentally cross and end up in the other side.
So taking on from where Andri left, I also want to share, for me was an interesting story after realizing it. When I look back now, I remember discussing with my friends at school where people go when they die, and the adults would refer to it as they're gone to the other side and they're watching their loved ones all the time. And as children, we were not always good with metaphors, of course. So we used to think that when people die, they would basically fly over the border and, watch us from there all the time. So now I cross to the other side to meet with my friends and spend time together, who are actually living on the other side of the divide. There was actually life, we just had never heard of it. So as you may have realized by now, the experience and even the possibility of crossing led to a beginning of a shift in perception about the other or the life on the other side. The magnitude of this development, though, was to be understood at a later stage when civil society organizations or individuals actually started utilizing the buffer zone as a tool for bridging the divide in Cyprus. The place where we are working today, the Home for Cooperation, is actually located in the first crossing that was opened back in 2003. It's called the Letra Palace Crossing. And organizations and projects like the Home for Cooperation are accelerating and contributing to the peace building and reconciliation efforts in Cyprus. We are transforming a zone which is characterized by conflict and violence to a zone for cooperation by allowing people to make the first contact in a neutral ground, even when they're not ready to engage fully, let's say.
Yeah, and in addition to this, I think the opening of the crossings brought so many new possibilities, because it meant that people were now able to cross. I mean, keep in mind that the crossings opened in 2003 after decades of zero contact between the two communities. So what it meant was that now people could cross to explore their country. For many, it was a way to kind of go and see their villages and their homes that they had to abandon during the conflict in the 60s and 70s. It meant people were able to kind of reunite with friends or visit places they haven't been able to visit for more than 30 years. And this was a conscious decision some people took. It was also a decision that carried a lot of psychological, weight. So I think different groups of people dealt with this crossing and this opening and this possibility in many, many different ways. So I think realizing that And in working in peace building, now we're able to speak about reconciliation. And we see it as a much needed process in Cyprus, because we feel like, at least in the peace building civil society community, we are able now to move on from a discussion that was solely centered around the conflict itself to take a step more and talk about more meaningful kind of discussions. Because as years pass by, a lot of people have built their lives around the existence of the crossings. One is which the home is located at. And people have built their businesses running across the divide. People are working on different intercommunal projects, even if they're not actively working on peace building. And most importantly, people have built families across the divide, whether that's friends, whether that's, building their own kind of homes. So in 2020, and I think this is very, very interesting to share, because it was a very difficult period for people in Cyprus, who especially built their lives around the crossings. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, authorities in Cyprus implemented a series of measures against the spread of COVID-19, as in every other country. But the first measure that was in place in Cyprus was the closure of the crossings. And this was before any other sort of control was implemented at the airports or at the ports. So as a result, people like us lost access to their work, their friends for a few months. And actually the crossings remained closed for more than a year. Closed in the sense of highly regulated, which meant you needed daily rapid tests or special permissions. I mean, it was a very difficult period. So recently we worked on a documentary called Divided Still, which basically features stories of people whose life was greatly affected by the closure of the crossings. And hearing these stories, it's stories of people, of students who couldn't go to school, of workers who couldn't go to work, or of people who couldn't visit their parents or their grandparents or their spouses even, because they ended up at the wrong side when the closure happened. So hearing the stories of the people made it clear to us that there are very strong connections and relationships that have materialized across and within communities because of the crossing points. And all of these stories and all of these people's stories and personal kind of connections are very important and have to be taken into consideration when there are negotiations or in the reconciliation process, both on the official level, but also on the level of civil society, which is where we operate.
Yeah, and after Andri's context, which was very helpful, thank you, Andri. I think to move on to end things on a positive note also, for us personally, I think Andri will share something similar. Returning to Cyprus after living abroad for so many years was not very easy, because suddenly you start to face the conflict every day and you realize that not many things have moved forward in these 7-8 years. And many people lost hope in the process. So for me, my position at the home, the communications officer at the home, was very timely for me, because it didn't only allow me to put my skills, my education into practice, but also it sparked the hope in me also, which had started to fade away in that process. And for me, introducing the work we do and working in peace building, organizing events in the buffer zone, promoting values like coexistence, respect and diversity through our programs, is not just a part of my position, my work, but it's also things that I would do and I will do simply as someone living in and caring about the future of Cyprus. And to me, the most precious outcome of the work we are doing is when you see someone crossing from one side to the other for the very first time, when people who didn't know each other start new collaborations, or long-lasting relationships, whatever that relationship may be.
Yeah, and I think also on this note, for me, and to contextualize where we are actually working and how we met, the home has allowed me to view the division of Cyprus in a completely new light. It has shown me that, you know, when you trust people to come together, then wonderful things can happen. My position now as the manager of the home has not only allowed me to continue observing this transformation and this reality based on my social anthropology background also, which is very interesting to see these transformations, as Hayrye said, of people crossing for the first time, or, you know, engaging with the other community for the first time. But it's also allowed me personally to grow within this team. It has allowed me to kind of see how it's possible to work with a clear goal on facilitating contact between the communities, to cultivate trust and respect, and to humanize the other, whatever the other may be, depending on who you are and who you're referring to. So through the weekly workshops that you can see also on the photo we're sharing, the language classes that we do, the guided city tours that we do, the Performing Arts Festival, which is one of our biggest projects, and all these kinds of events that our cafe also hosts, brunch sessions, different events with featuring different cuisines of Cyprus. Our mission is to build bridges and to invite people to cross them when they're ready. Because we understand that also for people, this transformation takes place at a different pace. And we know that we are presenting a model of Cyprus that it's very specific. It's a model which proves that even though we've been separated for kind of 5-6 decades, there's so much ground that we share that we can use to start imagining things together, to start working together, to achieve things together, and to eventually learn how to live together once again. And this may not be clear to the majority. We represent kind of a small minority, I think, on the island at this point. And it might not be clear to everyone, or not everyone might be comfortable with the concepts we are discussing. But we live through this experience every day. So for us, it's clear that it's possible. And it's not just a utopian, you know, scenario or a dream. It's a possible reality that we live through it every day. And in our team, we refer to the home as a seed planted to grow in people's minds and lives and hearts. And we strive to nurture these seeds so they can grow all over Cyprus. And I think the next step and the biggest challenge is to protect it and keep it alive so it becomes sustainable, which can then lead to the sustainable peace in Cyprus, that it's owned by all the communities of the island. I think this is the clear kind of message we would like for you to keep at the end of our presentation. So thank you very much